Kale adjusted the collar of his suit for the third time, staring at the reflection in the polished metal wall. It wasn't a royal uniform, but it had to look convincing. He had been paid a large sum of credits to do something completely outside his comfort zone. Act as the husband of Princess Celera, the heir of the Zyrithian Empire. The galaxy knew her as smart, dangerous, and untouchable. Kale was just a human negotiator with quick thinking and a knack for getting out of trouble, but a royal husband? That was something else entirely. The shuttle docked in the sprawling capital city, a place where glass towers glittered like stars and hovercraft moved in precise, graceful patterns. Kale stepped out and immediately felt the weight of countless alien eyes on him. His job was simple in theory: accompany Celera to a diplomatic event, act as her supportive spouse, and make everyone believe they were a perfect match. But he had been warned that the Zyrithian Empire didn't tolerate mistakes. Any slip could mean failure, or worse. Celera appeared as if she had stepped out of a legend. Her tall, slender frame moved with an elegance that seemed almost unnatural. Her violet eyes scanned the crowd, sharp and calculating, yet there was a flicker of amusement as they landed on Kale. "You're smaller than I expected," she said, her voice calm but edged with authority. Kale swallowed and forced a smile. "I've been told humans are adaptable," he replied. She arched an eyebrow, clearly unconvinced. The first hurdle was immediate. The Royal Protocol Officer, a tall, multi-limbed alien with golden eyes, handed Kale a thick manual titled, Marriage Conduct for Intergalactic Diplomats. Kale flipped through it, eyes widening at the complexity. Gestures, phrases, and expressions that humans didn't even have words for. "I'll try my best," he said, hoping that was enough. Celera didn't respond. She was already walking, her long cloak flowing behind her as she led him through the throng of dignitaries, each eye on them. Inside the Grand Palace, Kale felt even smaller. Crystal chandeliers hung like frozen waterfalls, and walls shimmered with iridescent murals depicting battles and alliances from centuries past. Celera's advisors whispered in a language he couldn't understand, but Kale noticed the way they watched him. Skeptical, wary, testing his reactions. Celera leaned close and whispered, "Don't embarrass me." Kale nodded, heart pounding. "I won't, hopefully." The ceremony was scheduled for the next day, but Celera had insisted on preparation. She guided him through walking protocols, bowing techniques, and the subtleties of making eye contact with alien nobles. Kale stumbled at first, nearly falling over during a curtsy that required 2 steps and a spin. Celera's lips twitched in what Kale hoped was amusement, though she remained silent. "You're going to have to learn quickly," she said, voice low. "The ceremony isn't forgiving." During dinner, Kale observed the court more closely. Aliens of all shapes and sizes filled the room, their features strange and intimidating. Some had multiple eyes, some glimmered with scales, and some had limbs that moved in patterns humans couldn't imagine. They were all waiting for a sign. Any mistake from the fake couple would become a reason to discredit Celera, and Kale's human face made him the weakest link. He tried to keep calm, following Celera's lead, copying her gestures, mimicking her polite nods, and pretending to understand the conversations around him. After the meal, Celera pulled him aside. "You're not just a prop, Kale. If anyone sees me hesitate or second-guess, the entire alliance could collapse. You need to be more than believable, you need to be convincing." Kale swallowed hard, realizing that his performance could affect not only his life but the fate of entire planets. "I understand," he said. And he did, even if the thought terrified him. That night, Kale couldn't sleep. He stared out of the palace window, looking at the city lights stretching into the distance. The contract promised safety and a large sum of credits, but the reality was daunting. He had been trained in negotiation, not deception or diplomacy at this level. And yet, a part of him felt a spark of excitement. He had survived tough situations before, relied on his wits, and somehow managed the impossible. This was just a higher-stake game. The next morning, Celera entered his quarters unannounced, carrying a small device. "We need to rehearse the greeting," she said. The device projected a holographic image of a previous ceremony, showing a perfect display of partnership, body language, and timing. Kale watched, memorizing every motion: how to tilt his head, when to bow, how to smile without looking foolish. It was a lot, but he repeated the motions until his muscles ached. Celera observed silently, occasionally correcting him, occasionally letting him try on his own. By the afternoon, they practiced walking together through the palace halls. Kale tried to match Celera's fluid movements, feeling clumsy and out of place. But as they walked, he began to notice patterns: how her hand brushed against his, signaling a subtle support, how her glance guided him when to pause or step forward. Slowly he began to move more confidently, less like a human imitator and more like a partner in the performance. Solara's eyes flicked to him and Kale caught the faintest hint of approval. Finally, the day of the ceremony arrived. Kale adjusted his suit for the last time, trying not to show his nerves. Solara approached, regal and composed, as though nothing could shake her. "Remember, Kale," she said softly, "this is more than a show. Be steady, be sure, and most importantly, be believable." He nodded, gripping her hand gently as they stepped into the hall filled with alien dignitaries. The crowd fell silent. Cameras hovered, nobles whispered, and Kale felt the immense pressure of every eye upon him. But he took a deep breath, recalling the lessons from the past days. The posture, the gestures, the synchronized movements with Solara. As they moved together, Kale realized he wasn't just performing anymore. He was part of something larger. An alliance, a story, a test of courage and trust. And in that moment he felt something unexpected: determination. Because this fake contract, this dangerous act of deception, was about to become real in ways he could not yet imagine. Kale's heart pounded, not just from fear but from the thrill of stepping into a world that humans rarely touched, and surviving it. He squeezed Solara's hand slightly, and she responded with the smallest, approving nod. Kale took his place beside her, ready for whatever the ceremony, and the galaxy, would throw at him next. The contract had begun, but their real story was only just starting. The grand hall of the Zyrithian palace shimmered under countless floating lights, each one casting a soft glow on the crystalline walls. Kale took a deep breath, trying to steady his nerves as he followed Princess Solara down the central aisle. Today was the ceremony that would officially present them as a married couple to the Galactic Council. Every alien dignitary, every ambassador, and every spy in the galaxy was watching. One wrong move, one hesitation, and the fragile alliance Solara had worked so hard to secure could collapse. Kale's hand brushed against Solara's. She didn't speak, but her eyes met his, sharp and focused. The slightest sign of fear or doubt would be noticed, and he could feel the weight of expectation pressing on him. He had memorized every step, every gesture, every phrase from the rehearsals, but humans were still awkward compared to the precise movements of Zyrithians. Still, Kale told himself, he had survived worse situations. If he could think fast and act confidently, he could pull this off. The ceremony began with a low hum as the council's holographic emblem projected above the hall, a swirling galaxy of colors that represented thousands of worlds. Solara and Kale approached the central platform. Kale straightened, following her lead, trying to match her rhythm, her poise. He noticed the murmurs of the crowd, the subtle whispers of doubt, curiosity, and surprise. Some aliens looked at him skeptically. A human negotiator as a royal husband was unheard of. Kale felt their eyes like lasers, but he forced himself to keep his face calm, projecting the image of assurance he didn't entirely feel. Solara stopped in front of the council's throne, and Kale mirrored her stance. A Zyrithian elder stepped forward, his many eyes glowing faintly as he spoke in a language Kale did not fully understand. Luckily, Solara had translated the key points beforehand, and Kale repeated the phrases as best as he could, bowing and inclining at the correct moments. The crowd observed, analyzing every gesture, every inflection. Kale's mind raced. If he messed up even slightly, the entire act would crumble. Then came the part that terrified him most, the public demonstration of unity. Solara extended her hand and Kale took it, trying to look natural, confident, and proud. He felt her fingers tense slightly in his, a reminder that they had to be convincing. Slowly, they walked together toward the ceremonial emblem in the center of the hall. Kale forced his muscles to relax, mimicking the grace Solara had shown him in rehearsal. Each step was deliberate, measured, a dance of diplomacy and appearance. Just as they reached the emblem, an alarm sounded. Kale froze for a moment, his heart racing, but Solara's calm voice cut through the panic. "Stay with me," she whispered. Kale nodded, gripping her hand tighter. Two figures in the crowd had moved suspiciously, drawing weapons that could strike before anyone noticed. Kale acted on instinct, stepping in front of Solara and raising his arm in a human gesture of defense. The attackers hesitated, surprised by the sudden interference, giving Solara a chance to use her own skills. With a few swift, precise moves, she disarmed the assailants. Kale barely had time to process what had happened. His mind was racing. In that moment, the fake husband act became a real test. Kale realized he wasn't just pretending anymore. Every decision, every reflex, every instinct mattered. Together they faced danger and together they succeeded. The council and audience watched silently, some in awe, some in disbelief, but the show had gone on without collapse. When the ceremony resumed, Kale felt a strange confidence building within him. The initial terror had passed, replaced by a sense of purpose. He and Celera performed the remainder of the ritual flawlessly. He repeated phrases, bowed when necessary, and smiled when appropriate. The crowd responded with applause and cautious approval. Even the most skeptical aliens seemed impressed by the unity and composure of the human and the princess. After the formal portion ended, Celera and Kale were led to a private chamber to rest. Kale slumped into a chair, exhausted. "You did well," Celera said, sitting across from him. There was no mockery in her voice, only measured approval. "You stayed composed. You adapted quickly. I expected mistakes, but you handled the unexpected." Kale exhaled, relief flooding him. "I was lucky," he said, but Celera shook her head. "No. You were decisive. You protected me. That is not luck." As they discussed the ceremony, Kale noticed subtle changes in the way Celera interacted with him. She no longer treated him simply as a hired actor. There was acknowledgement, respect, and a hint of trust. It was small, almost imperceptible, but for Kale it was a victory. The fake marriage had begun to feel like something real, at least in terms of partnership and reliance. The day was far from over. The council would hold private meetings discussing alliances, trade agreements, and military support. Kale had been invited to attend, not just as a human observer but as Celera's representative. He felt the weight of the responsibility again. Humans were rare in the Xyrithian capital, often underestimated or dismissed. Kale had to prove that he could contribute, that his skills were valuable beyond acting as a husband. During one meeting, an alien diplomat attempted to belittle Kale, questioning his understanding of galactic law and interstellar strategy. Kale responded carefully, relying on both preparation and instinct. He pointed out flaws in the diplomat's proposal with calm reasoning, offering alternative solutions. The room went quiet. Even Celera's advisors looked surprised. Kale had passed a test no one had expected him to face, proving that a human could think quickly, adapt, and hold his own among advanced alien minds. By evening, the formal ceremonies concluded, and a reception began. Dignitaries mingled, and Kale followed Celera's lead, greeting others, exchanging pleasantries, and maintaining their public image. He was tired, but his confidence had grown. He had survived scrutiny, performed complex rituals, and even helped defuse a dangerous situation. The contract that had once seemed impossible was starting to feel manageable. As the night wore on, Kale and Celera found a quiet balcony overlooking the city. Lights glimmered like stars, and the cold wind carried the scent of distant alien flora. Celera leaned on the railing, looking at the city thoughtfully. "You were different today," she said. "Not just a human playing a role. You adapted, you protected, and you thought ahead. That is rare." Kale felt a rush of pride mixed with surprise. I didn't think I could do it," he admitted. "But you made it easier, guiding me every step." Celera's lips curved in the smallest hint of a smile. Kale realized something important. The fake marriage had begun as a simple contract, a job with credits attached. But through the ceremony, danger, and public scrutiny, it had evolved. He wasn't just pretending anymore, he was part of a partnership built on trust, courage, and necessity. He had begun to earn Celera's confidence, and in turn he found a sense of purpose beyond the contract itself. The night ended quietly, but Kale knew the real challenges were only beginning. Enemies still lurked in the shadows, rival factions watched their every move, and the political landscape was as dangerous as the battlefield. Yet for the first time he felt ready. The ceremony had tested him and he had passed. Now he and Celera were a team and together they could face whatever threats lay ahead. Kale took a deep breath, feeling the chill of the alien night and the warmth of their growing partnership. The contract was more than a job now, it was a beginning. And as the city lights of the Xyrithian capital shimmered below, he understood that their story, dangerous and uncertain as it was, had only just begun. The day after the ceremony began quietly, but Kale could feel the tension beneath the calm. The palace corridors were filled with whispers and cautious glances. He and Celera moved through them together, still in their official roles as husband and wife. The city around them sparkled with alien technology, but Kale's attention was on the subtle signs of danger. Quick shadows in the hallways, a glimmer of metal hidden in folds of clothing, eyes that lingered too long. He had learned to trust his instincts, and something told him they were not yet safe. Celera noticed his wariness and raised an eyebrow. "You see more than most," she said quietly as they walked through the private garden. The air was sweet with alien blossoms, but Kale only half noticed. "I can't help it," he admitted. "I've survived by noticing things others ignore." Solara's violet eyes softened slightly. "Good. You will need that skill." The rumors had been circulating for days. Factions opposed to Solara's rule were planning something. Assassins, spies, and mercenaries might strike at any moment. Kale was beginning to understand why Solara had insisted on a human as her husband. Humans had a reputation for unpredictability and courage under pressure, qualities her enemies underestimated. Kale spent the morning studying palace maps and security layouts, learning the locations of escape routes and surveillance points. He noticed irregularities. Doors that should have been locked were open, patrol schedules that didn't match the posted logs. His heart sank as he realized these were signs that someone was already inside, moving against them. Solara joined him in the planning room. "You've noticed it too," she said, her voice steady. "Good. These are the shadows of danger I've been watching for. Most of my advisors ignore them, but not you." Kale nodded. "We need a plan. If something happens, we need to protect the palace and ourselves." Solara smiled faintly. "Then let's prepare." Over the next few hours, they tested the hidden corridors, practiced escape routes, and coordinated signals. Kale observed the staff, noting who was trustworthy and who seemed uneasy. Every minor detail mattered. For Kale, this was more than a fake marriage, it was survival. For Solara, it was her life, her throne, and the stability of her empire. That night, Kale couldn't shake the feeling of eyes on him. As he patrolled the corridors with Solara, he noticed a flicker of movement near one of the private chambers. His hand went instinctively to the communicator at his belt. "Someone's there," he whispered. Solara's eyes narrowed and she moved silently beside him. Together they approached the corridor, moving carefully, every sense alert. A shadow darted past them, disappearing into the darkness. Kale's pulse quickened. "We have company," he whispered. Solara's hand brushed his arm, a subtle signal that she trusted him to act. Kale took a deep breath and followed her lead, moving swiftly yet quietly. They found a hidden hatch leading to the lower maintenance tunnels. "This way," Solara said. Kale nodded, feeling a rush of adrenaline. The palace, beautiful as it was, suddenly felt like a trap. In the tunnels they found signs of intruders, footprints, discarded tools, and a small, strange device that blinked with red light. Kale examined it quickly. "Tracking device," he muttered. Solara crouched beside him. "They know we are aware," she said. "We have to move carefully. They might be watching every exit." Kale's mind raced. They were no longer playing a role. The shadows of danger were real and their enemies were clever. The next morning, Solara held a private council with Kale present. "These factions have been patient," she explained. "They've watched us, waited for the right moment. The ceremony distracted many but not all. Some have infiltrated our palace, hidden in plain sight." Kale listened intently, piecing together the puzzle. He noticed subtle cues in her speech, slight tensing of her shoulders, a glance toward the window that overlooked the gardens. Danger could strike from above, below, or within. Kale and Solara began preparing defenses. Kale studied alien technology he barely understood, learning how to disable locks, reroute security cameras, and intercept communications. Solara trained him in basic combat, emphasizing speed and precision over brute force. Kale discovered that humans, while physically weaker than many alien species, could compensate with creativity and quick thinking. He felt a growing confidence in his ability to protect Solara, and maybe even save the Empire. As the sun set, they returned to the balcony, overlooking the city that glittered like a sea of stars. Kale leaned against the railing, exhausted but alert. "They could strike at any moment," he said quietly. Solara nodded. "And we must be ready. Trust is everything now. Trust in each other and trust in your instincts." Kale's heart pounded. The fake marriage was over, this was real. Survival, strategy, and courage were the only currency now. Late that night, Kale was awakened by a soft alarm. He moved silently, alert, following the faint vibrations that indicated someone had breached the lower levels. He found Solara waiting for him near the secret passages. "It's time," she whispered. Kale's pulse quickened. The shadows of danger had become tangible. They had entered the palace and their enemies were close. They moved through the hidden corridors, silent and precise, listening for any sound that indicated movement. A door creaked slightly ahead. Kale raised his hand to signal stop, and they pressed against the wall. Peering around the corner, they saw figures in dark armor moving with stealth and purpose. Kale's mind raced. They had to escape, warn the council, and confront the threat if necessary. Celera looked at him, eyes sharp. Stay close. Trust your instincts. Kale nodded, remembering all the lessons of the past days. Observation, adaptation, quick thinking. Together, they slipped into a side passage, avoiding the intruders, moving toward the control room. The palace, with all its beauty and ceremony, had become a labyrinth of danger, testing their courage and partnership. By the time they reached the control room, Kale realized something important. He was no longer just a human hired to act as a husband. He had become a partner, a protector, and a strategist. Celera depended on him, and he was ready to meet the shadows of danger head-on. The palace trembled with unseen threats, but together they would face them. Kale took a deep breath, gripping the edge of the console. The night was far from over, and the real enemies were closing in. The shadows of danger had arrived, and the fake marriage had evolved into a battle for survival. But for the first time, Kale felt the thrill of purpose and the strength of trust. Whatever happened next, he would face it with Celera, and together they might just survive the storm. The palace was quiet when Kale and Celera returned to their quarters, but Kale could feel the tension lingering in the air. The shadows of danger they had sensed earlier were no longer distant threats. They were here. Kale studied the corridors, noting every security camera, every patrol route, every hidden passage. Celera's violet eyes scanned the same hallways with calm precision, though Kale knew the storm was coming. The first sign came with a subtle tremor beneath the palace floor. Kale froze, hand instinctively going to the communicator at his belt. Celera's voice cut through the silence, low and commanding. Enemies have entered. Now. Instantly they moved. Kale felt adrenaline surge through him as they dashed toward the central chamber, the heart of the palace, where the council's archives and control systems were kept. Figures emerged from the shadows. Assassins dressed in black, armed with advanced weapons designed to disable any normal defense. Kale's mind raced. He had never faced anything like this before, but the lessons of observation, quick thinking, and trust in Celera kicked in. One of the attackers lunged toward Celera, but Kale threw himself between them, grabbing a nearby staff and deflecting the weapon. The first attack had begun, and the palace was alive with chaos. Celera moved with deadly precision, her combat skills honed from years of training. She disarmed one assailant with a swift kick and a twist of her hand, using her cloak to entangle another. Kale, though less experienced, used his human ingenuity. He grabbed tools from the maintenance area, improvising barriers and blocking entrances to slow the attackers. Each moment was tense, every decision critical. As they moved through the hallways, Kale noticed the attackers were coordinated, their movements precise. This was not a random strike, it was a well-planned attempt to overthrow Celera's rule. Kale whispered to Celera, "They know our patterns, they've studied us." She nodded, eyes sharp. "We must outthink them, not just fight." Together they began using diversion tactics, setting off alarms in one area while moving through another, confusing the attackers and buying precious time. In the central control room, Kale worked quickly to access the security systems. With Celera covering him, he rerouted cameras, locked certain doors and activated defensive measures. The attackers were skilled, but Kale's creativity and Celera's agility gave them an advantage. "Almost there," he muttered, focusing on the holographic display showing the palace layout and intruder positions. Celera placed a hand on his shoulder, steadying him. "Focus. Every second counts." A group of intruders broke into the room through a side entrance. Kale grabbed a portable energy shield and held it just long enough for Celera to strike, incapacitating one of them. His heart raced, adrenaline fueling his movements. He realized that this fake marriage, this contract he had signed for money, had become a partnership of survival. They were no longer acting, they were fighting for their lives. Outside the control room, alarms echoed through the palace. The council had been evacuated to a secure location, but Kale knew that if the attackers reached the heart of the palace, the Empire's political stability could collapse. He and Celera coordinated their next move, deciding to lure the attackers into the lower maintenance tunnels. Kale quickly calculated the best route, using his human ingenuity to anticipate the intruder's path. Celera followed, trusting his judgment. In the tunnels, the battle intensified. Kale and Celera used the narrow spaces to their advantage. One attacker lunged from the shadows, but Kale ducked and tripped him, sending him crashing into the wall. Celera spun gracefully, striking another assailant with a controlled blow that left him unconscious. Their movements were synchronized, an unspoken understanding formed through trust and shared danger. Kale realized that he had begun to think like a warrior, not just a negotiator. Amid the chaos, Kale spotted the mastermind behind the attack, a tall figure wearing a cloak adorned with symbols of a rival faction. They were directing the assault, moving through the palace like a shadow. Kale whispered to Celera, "We need to stop them. That's who is orchestrating this." Celera's eyes narrowed. "Then we confront them together." They moved cautiously, using the tunnels and maintenance shafts to approach the figure. When the mastermind finally appeared in a wide hallway, Kale and Celera stepped into view. The attackers faltered, surprised by the sudden confrontation. Celera's voice echoed, commanding and precise. "Your attack ends here." Kale drew on all his courage, stepping beside her. "We won't let you harm the palace or her people." The fight was fierce. Kale improvised, using tools and the environment to his advantage, while Celera relied on her speed and strength. Together they pushed the attackers back, cornering the mastermind. Kale's mind raced, finding weaknesses in the enemy's stance, directing Celera when to strike and when to hold. Finally, with a coordinated effort, they disarmed and captured the enemy leader. The remaining attackers, seeing their commander defeated, fled into the shadows. The palace fell silent once more, save for the distant hum of emergency systems. Kale's chest heaved as he leaned against the wall, adrenaline slowly fading. Celera stood beside him, calm but alert. "You did well," she said quietly. Not many could have kept their head in the chaos. Kale shook his head, still catching his breath. "We did it together. I couldn't have managed without you." Celera's violet eyes softened for the first time. "And I couldn't have done it without your human unpredictability. You adapted when others would have failed." By the time dawn approached, the palace had been secured. Guards checked every corridor, systems were restored, and the council began returning. Kale and Celera surveyed the aftermath, noting the damage and assessing the security. Kale realized that the fake marriage had transformed into a real partnership. Trust, courage, and quick thinking had carried them through the night. Later, in the private chamber, Celera finally allowed herself a moment of relief. "Tonight proved something important," she said. "Humans, and you specifically, are capable of things others underestimate. You saved not just me but the palace and the alliance." Kale nodded, feeling a sense of pride he hadn't expected. "I never thought a contract could lead to something like this," he admitted. Celera smiled faintly, a hint of warmth in her eyes. Kale understood then that the enemy strike, terrifying as it had been, had revealed something crucial: the value of human ingenuity, courage, and trust. He had started the journey as a negotiator, hired to act, but the real test had transformed him. He was now a protector, a partner, and a trusted ally. And Celera, once untouchable and distant, had acknowledged his worth. As the first light of day filtered through the palace windows, Kale felt a strange mix of exhaustion and exhilaration. The enemy had struck, but they had survived. The real challenges were only beginning, but for the first time, Kale felt ready. Together with Celera, he would face whatever threats awaited the Empire. The fake marriage had ended in a true alliance forged in fire, strategy, and courage, and neither of them would forget the night the enemy struck, and the human negotiator who had stood by the princess when it mattered most. The morning after the attack, the palace was quiet but tense. Guards patrolled every corridor, and the council gathered to review the events of the night. Kale stood beside Celera, still in his role as husband, but the pretense had shifted into something real. He had earned the trust of the princess, and now, every eye in the palace regarded him differently, not just as a human but as a strategist and protector. Celera addressed the council with authority. "Last night proved that threats can come from anywhere. We cannot rely solely on tradition or brute force. We must adapt, learn, and strengthen our alliances." She glanced at Kale. "And sometimes, help comes from the most unexpected places." The council murmured, impressed. Kale felt a quiet pride. He had gone from a negotiator hired to pretend, to someone who had saved lives and preserved the palace. The day was spent repairing damage, interrogating the captured attackers, and assessing vulnerabilities. Kale moved through the halls with confidence, offering insights on security measures and potential weaknesses. His human perspective, once underestimated, was now valued. Celera worked alongside him, showing respect in her subtle gestures and careful attention to his words. Together they were no longer a facade, they were a team. By afternoon, the palace held a private meeting with the leaders of nearby worlds. Celera introduced Kale formally. "This is Kale, my partner in both diplomacy and defense. His actions during the attack saved countless lives, and his counsel will guide us in the coming days." Some leaders raised eyebrows, surprised that a human so often dismissed in intergalactic politics had earned such honor. Kale met their gaze steadily, aware of the weight of their scrutiny, yet confident in the partnership he had forged with Celera. During the meeting, Kale noticed subtle tensions among the visiting delegates. Some feared the power of the Zyrithian palace, others resented human influence. Kale spoke with calm clarity, emphasizing unity and cooperation rather than fear or dominance. His ideas were practical, logical, and unexpectedly effective. Celara's approval was clear in the slight nods she gave him. By the end of the discussions, the delegates had shifted from skepticism to cautious respect. Kale had not only protected Celara's life but also strengthened her political position. As evening fell, the palace prepared a small celebration. The council had approved a feast to honor their survival and reaffirm alliances. Kale and Celera walked through the grand halls together, their presence commanding attention. The attendants and guards who had once ignored him now bowed, and even some of the skeptical diplomats offered nods of acknowledgement. Kale realized that perception had shifted. Humans were no longer just outsiders, they were capable of courage, insight, and loyalty that rivaled the most skilled alien warriors. During the feast, Celera leaned close to Kale, her voice quiet but warm. "You've changed how they see humans," she said. "And you've changed how I see partnership. You've proven that loyalty and courage are stronger than any contract or title." Kale smiled faintly. "I never imagined a fake marriage could lead to this." Celera's eyes softened. Sometimes reality surpasses expectation. The celebration continued with laughter, music, and the exchange of stories. Kale found himself speaking with leaders of other worlds, sharing human experiences and listening to theirs. He discovered that mutual respect, understanding, and courage could form bonds that outlast threats, politics, and fear. Celera watched him interact, her expression one of quiet satisfaction. She had chosen a human for an impossible task, and he had exceeded every expectation. Later, Kale and Celera returned to the balcony overlooking the palace gardens. The night was calm, the stars shining brightly in the alien sky. "The true work begins now," Celera said, her voice thoughtful. "The attack showed our enemies are bold, cunning, and patient. But it also showed the strength of alliance, trust, and courage. Together we can face whatever comes next." Kale nodded, feeling a sense of resolve. He had faced danger, deception, and political intrigue, and he had survived, not alone but with Celera. They stood in silence for a moment, the weight of their partnership settling around them. Kale understood that the fake marriage contract had been a doorway, leading to something far greater. A true alliance, born from necessity, tested by danger, and strengthened by trust. He had learned that humans, underestimated as they were, could change the course of events, influence the decisions of powerful leaders, and even protect an empire. In the following days, Kale and Celera worked closely to fortify the palace and strengthen diplomatic ties. They trained together, strategized together, and made decisions as equals. Kale's insight, combined with Celera's experience and authority, created a partnership that no enemy could easily challenge. Even the remaining factions plotting against them hesitated, knowing that a human and a princess, united, could be more dangerous than any army. One morning, as they reviewed the palace defenses, Celera turned to Kale. "You've earned your place here, not as a guest, not as a pretender, but as a true partner. The galaxy will remember what humans can do when they are brave and trusted." Kale felt a deep pride. The journey from a hired negotiator to a valued ally had been dangerous, exhausting, and challenging, but it had also been transformative. By nightfall, the palace was secure, the council strengthened, and their enemies forced into retreat. Kale and Celera stood together on the balcony once more, the alien city glowing beneath them. "We've proven something important," Kale said. "Humans aren't as weak or limited as they think. And together we're stronger than anyone expected." Celera smiled, a rare, genuine warmth in her eyes. "Yes, the true alliance has begun." As they looked out at the galaxy beyond, Kale realized that their story was no longer about contracts, ceremonies, or appearances. It was about courage, trust, and partnership. The challenges ahead would be many, but the bond they had forged could withstand anything. The human who had once been a mere negotiator had become an indispensable ally, and the princess he had married in pretense had found a partner she could trust completely. The palace lights shimmered like distant stars, and Kale felt a profound sense of purpose. The enemy had struck, but together they had survived. The fake marriage had evolved into a real alliance, one that would shape the future of the Empire, the galaxy, and the humans who were now part of it. In that moment, Kale knew, The true test was not the contract, the ceremony, or even the battle. The true test was trust, courage, and the willingness to stand together. And he and Celera had passed it. The alliance they formed would endure, not because it was required, but because it was chosen, and because together, human and princess, they were unstoppable.